USAID is in many ways, I mean, we've all known about the waste, the $5,000 toilet seats at the Pentagon. But what we don't know is what the AID has been doing. Not only is their overhead about 90%, nobody would invest in a charity that had 90% overhead because they spend money on contractors and subcontractors and so forth. But very often they're telling the countries that they're giving aid to do the wrong things, to do socialist policies that run completely counter. Plus, there's the whole question of corruption, whether certain people are getting rich off of all this, not only in other countries, but in our countries as well. So you've got all these elements. I really think there is a fundamental recognition of the waste and fraud in our government that we've never had in this country before.
The one area of government that Americans of both parties and all movements oppose is foreign aid. And you know why? Because the American people are smart and they understand that foreign policy doesn't, foreign aid doesn't work. Let me give you an example. What is the name of that organization? The Agency for International Development. Show me where they've brought international development, David. None. I mean, there is no evidence whatsoever after spending hundreds of billions of dollars that they're actually causing economic growth. Now, here's the Steve Moore strategy. Let's get rid of all the USAID and then put on all our military planes and stuff copies of Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom and fly them over these places like Africa and dump them out. Because you and I and everybody listening to the show knows and watching the show knows that it's free markets and free enterprise, not government programs that cause growth.
Well, and by the way, sometimes they're actually supporting socialist policies in these countries that they go into, whether it was working with the Sandinistas in Nicaragua. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let me give you an example of how pernicious it is. For the big issue for many of these little villages in Africa and so on is they don't have access to basic electricity. You can't grow if you don't have electricity. Well, these left-wing advocates go into these places with U.S. money and say, oh, don't build a coal plant, don't build a gas plant, you need windmills or something like that. I mean, it's just crazy.
It really
is. It's so terrible. It's actually impeding development.
Steve, I got to stick to the subject that I think we care most about is getting those tax cuts extended. And the extraordinary thing, we were hearing from Axios and other news sources that the CBO has found out that it would cost $4.7 trillion to extend the tax cuts. That same CBO, by the way, the same CBO reports that since 2017, since the first Trump tax cuts were put in, we have collected $1.5 trillion more dollars than we had before. So they're saying that extending those tax cuts, which have provided us with 48% increase in tax revenue, would cost. How is that possible that you can use the word cost with regard to the tax rate cuts that have brought in so much revenue?
You know, David, your numbers are precisely right. You're exactly right that, in fact, over the first 6 or 7 years of that tax cut, we got more revenues in than they thought even if we hadn't done the tax cut. So we surpassed the revenues. Here's our big problem and challenge in getting that done. We have too many Republicans, not Democrats. Republicans are saying you have to pay for the tax cut. What does that mean? We don't have to pay for it. It pays for itself. It did pay for itself. And why would you continue to use numbers that we know are wrong? The same people who got it wrong.
Let me just stop you right there, Steve. What is the answer to that? Why do they keep using numbers that are dead wrong and that defeat what Donald Trump wants?
Great question, because you know what? These come from the Congressional Budget Office. Who runs that? Congress, the House and the Senate. David, who runs the House and the Senate? The Republicans do. So why don't they put somebody in there that is an honest scorer that will do it right? Because CBO, you and I fought this for 30 years. They always get the numbers wrong.
Yeah. Well, when they're reporting what happened, the numbers are right. And the numbers show that the tax rates, when the tax rates go down, there's more economic activity, more people paying taxes, and revenues go up. It happened all the time in U.S. history. But unfortunately, David, some people are slow learners very quickly.
We're going to get this. We're going to get it done. I'm going to give you guys a guarantee. We are going to get this done this year, but it's like pulling teeth right now.
Welcome back. Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell appearing before the Senate Banking Committee today and the House Financial Services Committee tomorrow. This is his semi-annual monetary policy report and report on the economy. Committee Chairman Tim Scott set to grill Powell on debanking during the Biden administration, as well as Powell's plans to reform Basel III regulations and the record amount of regulations from federal banking agencies. Joining me now is the man himself, South Carolina Senator and Chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, Tim Scott. Mr. Chairman, always a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me this morning.
Good morning, Maria. Good morning, Maria. Good to be with you. Thanks so much.
Tell us what's most important for you in terms of where you want to go with Jay Powell today.
Well, Maria simply said, under Jay Powell, the Fed has been weaponized for liberal causes. They've debanked crypto assets. They've had stress tests that puts more capital on the sidelines. And then Basel III. Basel III is another way of saying you'll not have the money for mortgages and for small businesses to start because you have so much capital on the sidelines. It is just not good for our economy. Jay Powell needs to get back to calling balls and strikes fairly, not joining green energy schemes for financing. We need a Fed chair that actually helps grow our economy. Donald Trump is going to fix the economy that Joe Biden broke.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've got so much to look at. President Trump is trying to tap into the energy capacity in America as a way to get inflation down. And so far, the expectations are that inflation is still elevated. You know, what is the Fed going to do now after telling us for so long that it was transitory?
Well, you know, Jay Powell and I had that conversation recently. I said it was transitory 3 years ago, and it took him about 12 months to get to where I'm not an economist, he is. Here's what we ought to know. We ought to know that Jay Powell needs to do his job, do his job. President Trump's up to the task, and you're 100% right, Maria. If you have more excavation of energy, your prices goes down, not just at the pump, but everything energy is required to bring to the consumers. That means our entire economy. We need fewer headwinds for President Trump's agenda and more support. And that's why we're going to do everything in our power to have the conversation today about Jay getting out of the way of America's economy and becoming wind beneath the wings of President Trump. That is the goal of this hearing, is to make sure that we highlight challenges brought to us by the Fed, whether it's debanking, not only crypto firms, but remember choke point 1.0. The Biden administration continued to hunt legal businesses like firearm dealers, manufacturers, like oil and gas. Can you imagine the regulatory pressure put on oil and gas that actually led to increasing the prices? Thank God Almighty, President Trump will focus on the average person working paycheck to paycheck, leading to a blue-collar comeback, because here's a man who knows how to create the art of the deal for the American consumers.
Well,
it's
I mean,
good
Senator,
news in
you
America.
make such a great point. And, you know, when I think back during the Biden administration about all the pressure they put on their political enemies and on the media to also ostracize their political enemies. I mean, we know what happened with Twitter and the Twitter files, how 1,000 officials from the Biden administration were working with social media to censor Americans and to take down people that they just didn't like. And now we hear that the same situation went on for banking and debanking. Do you believe that if the Biden administration felt that, you know, you were MAGA, if the Biden administration felt that you were not on board for the climate change agenda, that they actually suggested to banks that they should debank those people?
1,000%. That is exactly what I've heard from the CEOs already. The CEOs of the bank said this to me, to my face, eye to eye, that the OCC and regulators were going to create a reputational risk, whatever that means, against banks who did the things like banking legal businesses, like banking crypto. Melania Trump, the first lady of our country, was debanked. How is that possible in the freest land in the world? One way: Biden administration weaponizing the entire government. Remember back to the Obama administration when the IRS was actually targeting conservative organizations and religious organizations? Think about today. FDIC just recently released a trove of documents reinforcing the fact that, yes, regulators have been weaponized.
Unbelievable. You're right. Melania Trump told me that exclusively in my interview last year, that as soon as she left the White House, her bank calls her and tells her, oh, we can't accept you as a customer anymore. It's just outrageous, the politicization that has gone on in this government. Now, what do you want to say about potential mergers within financial services in government? Because I know that the Democrats are going nuts over this idea that CFPB is being closed down. There's also a speculation that the CFTC and the SEC have overlap. Maybe you want to merge those. Are you expecting mergers within some of these government agencies as another way to cut costs, Senator?
Maria, let us pray. Let us pray that it happens today. One of the things that's exciting about the Trump administration is vote saying, CFPB, don't come to work, don't do anything because you've wrecked the economy. Here's what they've done. They put so much pressure on small businesses that they've literally had a chilling effect. Good news is it's a new day. I believe the CFPB can go away and have no negative impact.
Interesting. So we're about to talk with Tom Homan in a moment on the border, and I know you've been to the border a ton of times, but now the administration is moving toward deputizing thousands of IRS agents that were hired under President Biden and send them to the border. So, Senator, what about this? DHS sent a letter to the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, requesting that the IRS provide agents for immigration enforcement efforts. You recently introduced a bill which sends IRS funding to help secure the border. And you've got another bill which grants President Trump the ability to sanction individuals, non-governmental organizations, and any other institution who promotes illegal immigration. Tell us about this, because I guess the questions are, look, Biden hires 90,000 or whatever it was, 70,000 new IRS agents to look under every rock to try to audit all of us. And now you're saying, or the government's saying, look, we're going to send those people to the southern border. What do they know about the border, Senator? I mean, is that the right use for them? I'm not against it. I just, how do you make that case?
$41 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act. Instead of going to the IRS to terrorize Americans, how about let's take illegal immigrants out of the country? It doesn't take much to recognize you're crossing our border illegally. Go the other way.
Yeah. Great point. Senator, great to talk with you.
Easy.
We'll be watching your work. Good luck with the hearing this morning. Thank you, sir. Welcome back now to the border. A memo from ICE was leaked, and that memo revealed details of a planned crackdown on illegals in Los Angeles. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem says she believes the FBI leaked it. Noem posted this on X. The FBI is so corrupt. We will work with any and every agency to stop leaks and prosecute these crooked deep state agents to the fullest extent of the law, writes the Department of Homeland Security Secretary. It comes days after a similar leak happened for a raid in Aurora, Colorado, where several Tren de Aragua gang members were allegedly able to escape capture because of the leaked memo. Joining me now is U.S. Border Czar Tom Homan. Tom, it's great to have you. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks for all of your efforts. That's number one. You were at that Colorado raid. Tell me what happened. Do you believe the FBI is behind leaking your plans and allowing these maniacs, these Tren de Aragua gangsters, to escape capture?
Well, yeah, the Aurora operation was leaked. We think we found the source of the leak. It's under investigation right now by DHS IG. Secretary Noem, I agree with her that there's some information that tends to show that the second leak and the California operation may have been someone in the FBI. I've talked to the Deputy Attorney General. We talk every day, but this weekend we talked about he has opened up a criminal investigation into that leak. So when we find these people and we have the evidence to support a prosecution, that's exactly what's going to happen. They don't understand. I don't care what their political beliefs are. This isn't about politics. This is about the safety of our officers. It's only a matter of time if these leaks continue that our officers are going to walk into a place and be ambushed by someone who just don't care about life and are going to take these ICE officers on. It's already a dangerous job. Giving the bad guys a head up, we're coming, is going to just make the job much more dangerous. We're taking it serious. It's under criminal investigation. Those who are responsible will be held criminally responsible, and we'll prosecute them.
That's unbelievable. What are you going to do to keep your raids quiet? I mean, You know, now you know somebody on the inside is leaking your plans, and you can't have that.
No, and that's why we're going to take serious action, and it's under criminal investigation. I think once that word gets out and we're making it known, we're going to prosecute. We don't care if you carry a badge or gun or not. You will be criminally prosecuted, and we'll lock you up. So, look, we're keeping the plans real tight. You know, I said from day one, we want to be transparent with the American people that we truly are concentrating on public safety threats and national security threats. So we had some media ride-alongs. Bill Melugin did the Aurora. But, you know, we're keeping things close hold now. We're reevaluating, you know, how much media ride-along we want. I'm not pointing the finger at him. We can't show any leaks by the friendly media, but we're looking at everything. But here's what people need to understand. We're going to keep coming. This is not going to slow us down. In sanctuary cities, you want to put roadblocks up? We'll double the manpower in sanctuary cities. We'll double the targeting in sanctuary cities. If we can't get them at their home, we'll get them at the workplace. We're going to increase worksite enforcement tenfold. We are not walking away. We're coming. We're not going to be stopped. We're going to keep President Trump's promise on looking for those who are in the country illegally that are a public safety threat. Nothing will stop us from doing this job.
Well, that's terrific to hear because people are afraid of these dangerous gangs. Look, Kristi Noem also sent a letter to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and she's requesting that the IRS provide agents for immigration enforcement. She says they can help with investigating illegal employment and money funding, human trafficking. They can also assist with arresting, detaining, and transporting migrants, Tom. Tell me about this, because I know Joe Biden hired tens of thousands of IRS agents to try to look under every rock and audit all American citizens so that he can get more money raised through tax audits. How are you going to transition those people to become border agents?
Well, it's really not that difficult for the IRS special agents who carry a badge and gun. They can certainly help on these operations. It only takes one immigration official with Title VIII authority, immigration authority, to make that arrest, but we can always use more armed officers to watch the perimeter, watch the back door. And certainly the non-officers in IRS, they can do keystrokes. They can sit there and process an illegal alien for us, and that takes a badge and gun out of that processing office and put them on the streets, which increases the manpower in the streets, increases the number of teams on the street. So they can be a force multiplier in many ways. I agree with the Secretary. We can use them in law enforcement and investigative capacity to chase the money, right? These criminal cartels count on the money they make. That's how they buy off Mexican officials. That's how they pay off, you know, the corrupt customs officials. So chasing the money, IRS, great work. But they can also help in operations with their law enforcement presence. And those who aren't law enforcement officers serve many jobs. We could put them in where we can take a badge and gun out of a non-enforcement job and put them back on the street. So there'll be a force multiplier. I agree 100%. Let's put them to work.
That's great. I mean, it's a good idea. Look, the last time we spoke, you were in an undisclosed location. And, you know, we knew that it was a very sensitive operation. I mean, this is obviously partly it was leaked. We didn't do it, but you were in an undisclosed location. I didn't say where you were. And I asked you a question. I said, are you going to be able to bust up these networks that have already created huge businesses in America? Because the drug cartels, you know, they charge everybody to get over the border. They put them inside the border, but then they have to keep paying those drug cartels. And they have actually started businesses here in America. I'm talking about drug trafficking business and even worse, human trafficking going on in America. How substantive is that? You know, how persistent is that? And are you busting any of them?
Yes, human trafficking investigations are up over 300%, so we're on top of that. Not only human trafficking investigation, but the cartel's presence in our major cities in the country. So it's just not Tren de Agua. Look, I'm not going to be happy to every single member of Tren de Agua out of the country. We're going to eradicate them from the United States, along with the other criminal cartels who are taking a presence in every major city. There used to be the day they just smuggled the guns into, smuggled the narcotics into the United States. Then our gangs, United States gangs, would do the distribution. They are now in every major city in the country. They've taken over even the interior distribution networks of the narcotics trafficking. They're on top of our list. We're working very close with DEA. DEA side by side with us on this interior enforcement operation along with the FBI. So yes, we're targeting those trafficking organizations both with humans and drugs. You're going to see a huge decrease in the amount of that trafficking going on in the country. Look, the border numbers right now, Maria, we're down 90%, which means less women and children being sex trafficked in the United States, less fentanyl is getting in the United States to kill Americans. and less terrorists are crossing the border. President Trump, what he's done to this border already has significantly hurt the cartels. They're losing billions of dollars a month because of what President Trump has done. We're going to suffocate these people. We're going to shut them down because if they don't have money, they can't bribe officials and they can't continue their business. So we're going to tackle just not in the United States, not just in Mexico, but worldwide. The illegal cartels in 43 countries around the globe. We're attacking them. Since President Trump has called them a terrorist organization, that opens up a wide net of what we can do with these cartels. We're on it. We're not going to stop till we finish it.
That's a great point. So what does that give you? The fact that now you are officially naming these drug cartels terrorist organizations? Because I mean, I've heard in the past that the Mexican drug cartels, they run Mexico. So you can do a deal with, Claudia Sheinbaum and, the Mexican government, but are they also answering to the dangerous cartels?
Oh, absolutely. Look, I've done this for over 3 decades. Like, even our vetted units, the units that we personally vet in Mexico, the Mexican federal agents, we don't even tell them everything because we don't fully trust many people in Mexico. And look, the cartels have survived for decades in Mexico. I'm not saying every military officer, every law enforcement officer, every politician is corrupt, but many are. And many are forced into corruption because if they don't take the buy-off from the cartels, do what they want, they'll kill them and their families. We've seen thousands of journalists killed in Mexico. We've seen thousands of politicians and government officials who have been murdered by the cartels. President Trump's move to make them a terrorist organization and taking them on, I think it's going to make Mexico a much safer country, and it'll be a game changer. Can you imagine the country of Mexico with no criminal cartels running that country, running the operations and killing so many people down there? I think Mexico would be blessed to have President Trump take the cartels out of business once and for all.
Well, you're absolutely right. So you say that the border crossings are down more than 90%. So then illegals, reportedly, they're turning around and heading back. The officials are saying it's a new trend in Trump's border crackdown. They're not coming. Canadian police also caught more than a dozen illegal migrants trying to cross the border there, the north border, in below freezing temperatures, including 5 children, reportedly wearing, quote-unquote, inadequate clothing. This happening as President Trump's tariff threats are pushing Mexico and Canada to ramp up border enforcement. How significant has that been, Tom? What do you want to tell us about the assistance that now you're getting from Mexico and Canada with regard to their troops or however they're helping your efforts at the border?
Look, I think President Trump has proven with borders crossing down over 90%, Joe Biden could have done this. But, President Trump came in a matter of 2 weeks. 2 weeks have moved the border numbers down to numbers. The other day, Maria, less than 300. Less than 300. I've done this since 1984. I don't remember the numbers ever being less than 300.
No, I agree with you.
It's already a great process on the border. Canada, I met with the Canadian officials. They're doing more to secure the border up there. Look, I grew up on the Canadian border. I know that border very well. Canada's now stepping up. Of course, they're putting military in their border now. So President Trump has done great things from Mexico and Canada by the pure power of the presidential office. President Trump's a game changer, and he's proven it every day.
And Tom, I know that on average it was several thousand at the border every day, but I remember when there were all those people in Eagle Pass under the bridge, and we were talking about a peak of 11,000 people a day coming through the U.S. border. And now you're telling me it's 300 people? We were up to 11,000 a day.
11,000 down to 283. Because of President Trump's actions. President Trump has proven every day he's a great president, greatest president in my lifetime.
Great job for you. Great job. Thank you, Tom Homan, as well. Thank you, President Trump. Good to see you, sir. We'll be watching your work. Thank you, sir.
Fox Business Alert, the battle lines are drawn. Democrats lining up on the side of unrestricted, unaccountable government spending, and they're ready to fight for every last penny. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian Brenberg, joined by my co-host Taylor Riggs. Cheryl Cassoni in for Dagan McDowell, Jackie DeAngelis, and Michael Lee Strategies founder Michael Lee. Welcome to the Big Money Show. We begin with the clash over cuts. DOGE is uncovering billions in waste, and Washington is digging in its heels.
Elon, come here and face us. Bring your on over here.
There's another branch of government in Article 3, the courts.
We will fight it out in Congress. We will fight it out in the courts. We will fight it out across this country.
Elon Musk needs to keep his grubby hands, his greedy, grubby hands off of our government.
They're even ready to shut down the government to do it. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is leading the charge. He's created a whistleblower tip line so federal workers can tattle on Trump's budget cuts. But what are they defending? Things like the Air Force's $2.3 million program to train airmen in inclusive leadership? Good luck on the battlefield with your unconscious bias training. Michael Lee, you are a guy who's not into soap opera. These folks are in Washington, D.C. They want to make a mess. They want to make a big hoopla, but you're a markets guy. What do the markets think about what Musk is doing, Trump is doing, and their likelihood of success ultimately?
Well, as a markets guy, as a numbers guy, I am shocked at how big the numbers are that Elon is coming up with. It may seem like Elon speaks in hyperbole like Trump, but he doesn't. Like, this is one of the smartest men, one of the most influential men that has ever walked the face of the earth. And so when he's out there saying, like, we're going to find well in excess of $1 trillion on an annual basis from waste, fraud, and abuse and programs that we don't need, that is mind-blowing considering the size of our deficit is $2.5 trillion. So right now, if you're like me and you're sitting here saying, okay, well, 20 cents out of every dollar that comes into the federal treasury goes to pay interest on debt. And we're creating a new $1 trillion every 100 days or so. This has to stop. We need dramatic change. We need an almost balanced budget in the next 24 months. Otherwise, that 20 cents of every dollar that's coming in becomes 25, 30, 40, 50, and then you have to make horrible decisions to keep our country going. So I think this is unbelievable news. I think the Democrats are making a massive political miscalculus. You know, recent polling out by Rasmussen saying Elon's far more popular than the Democrat Party at the moment. This is the wrong tact. If they want to shut down the government, I mean, that's like telling a vegan he can't have meat. That's fine.
That's good.
You're speaking to a vegetarian here, so I'm nodding along.
I just want to talk a little bit about what this particular pause means with respect to all of these court cases, because Elizabeth Warren was saying we'll challenge these things in court, and that's how this is going to go, whatever particular issue it is. So we're talking about the block on Trump's buyout. Many people, I think it was more than 65,000, wanted to take that buyout offer. They brought this case in Boston. It's Judge O'Toole, appointed by Bill Clinton, so that gives you a sense. I have to guess that Boston had jurisdiction, but they may have had choice of venue, and then therefore they would choose a venue that would be favorable to them. So it's a case that the unions are basically bringing, and they're saying that what Trump is trying to do is what's a slapdash. It's a failure to consider the functioning of the government. The opposition is saying it's actually a humane off-ramp with respect to accomplishing his agenda. And we had questioned why he was giving such great terms, actually. I mean, he could have just fired them and not given them any severance or any kind of a buyout. And so I think that they kind of foresaw this coming, and they thought if we give them better terms, it makes our position a little bit more favorable. And of course, this is not the only suit. We're going to talk about it later, but the union that represents the CFPB is also bringing a similar suit, and they're just going to challenge these to slow it down. Right now, they can't proceed with the buyout, and his agenda gets stalled that way.
You know, actually, Bill McGurn makes a really good point about the CFPB. I'm glad you brought that up, Jackie, because he talks about it in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal this morning. And one of the things he says about, well, the title is Elon Musk is having a ball, which, let's be clear, he should be. And he may not be able to get all the cuts that he wants. But he talks about the CFPB because, look, he goes, for years, Congress has chipped away at presidential powers, creating agencies looking at you. This is a direct quote, looking at you, CPSC, as it tries to insulate itself from presidential authority. These agencies appeal to progressives. And he goes on to talk about the egregious amount of money that these progressive policies, USAID, we can go back to that for a moment. We can, you know, the military's next. Secretary Hegseth was just speaking over in Germany, and he said, we're opening the books, bring it on, because if you start to pull back money that's being wasted at the Defense Department, that's money that goes to warriors, that goes to protect our military men and women. But at the end of the day, you know, and that ruling that you talked about, that move by the judge, all of this is going to end up in the court system. It's all going to end up at the Supreme Court. let's do it now versus wait, because I think Elon Musk has a lot more work to do.
Right.
You know, when it comes to CFPB, you guys, I'm an old-fashioned girl. If I was sitting in front of Jay Powell, like a lot of the senators are today, I'd be asking him about the balance sheet and the runoff and mortgage-backed securities and, whoa, inflation maybe. But a lot of his questions, Mike Lee, were about the CFPB, because we've had a lot of interesting conversations on this program where people on the left think that you can't shut it down because it's congressional authority, but people on the right, Unleash Prosperity founder Stephen Moore, E.J. Antoni, say, no, actually, the Fed approves the CFPB's budget request. And when asked, Powell said, how many times have you turned down a request? He says, 0. We always give them the money they ask for because legally we can't deny them. But the irony is it's supposed to be coming from the Federal Reserve's profits. They don't have any profits. There are no profits. They've been losing hundreds of billions of dollars, according to E.J. Antoni.
Right.
But every time they ask for a couple $100 million, the Fed has to say yes. So that actually, surprisingly, was a twist in the testimony today, where Jay Powell had to answer questions about the CFPB, and maybe brings to light who really is in charge of this thing.
So, you know, if you go back to the beginning of the first Trump administration, there was a Supreme Court case that shook up the CFPB because it was designed to basically be an unaccountable institution.
Right.
Exactly. Right? Like a fourth branch of government where you have three co-equal branches, the legislative, the judicial, and the executive. And bringing all this all together, district judges in Boston, in Rhode Island, in New York are not co-equal with the executive, and they cannot take out the executive's power. They can't declare war. They can't write laws. They can rule on laws, but I think we're getting to a point where the Trump administration says to the Supreme Court, you either need to rule on this now or we're going to ignore it until you rule on it, because this is ridiculous. You can't tell me that the president and his appointees can't run an executive agency. And to that point, bringing it all back, you can't have an agency that's an executive agency that exists outside the power of the executive. And maybe you can't completely shut down these agencies, but you can take the employees from 15,000 to 200.
But they're Biden-appointed judges. Let's be clear. If you look at every case that's been presented right now, they're Biden-appointed judges.
I think, though, you made the key point. They're going to get involved in little ways right now and try to block things. President Trump runs the executive. If he wants to fire executive branch people, he will do it, and he should have a way to do it. If we want to get rid of the CFPB, I don't know if Steve Moore is right. I don't know if the people on the left are right. I don't care. At some point, you get Congress together and say, guys, pass a law. This is the worst agency that's ever existed. It is Elizabeth Warren's dream for all the worst reasons. And it's got to go. And I think the American people are on board with that, because they don't look at what's happening. They don't see Maxine Waters out there swearing at Elon Musk and say, that's someone I want to follow. Yeah, right. Does anybody say that?
Look, they created it to deal with the financial crisis. Taylor talked about that yesterday. Fair enough. I mean, that was a very dark time in our nation's economy and for our financial markets, and people were losing homes left and right and losing their livelihoods. But that was then and this is now. And I don't think there is any place for the CFPB.
No need to make it darker with terrible bureaucratic policy.
It is a perfect time to bring in Kevin O'Leary. Do these aluminum and steel tariffs concern you?
No, obviously all tariffs you should be concerned about because it's escalating trade wars. But let's talk about tariffs in two verticals. Number one, what Trump is doing is looking all around the world, including Canada, and saying, well, it's an imbalance in tariffs, particularly with India, for example. They have some tariffs north of 20% on certain sectors, and he's going to balance that out. So if India is going to tax the U.S. at 24%, reciprocal on the same goods and services in the U.S., that's just making a level playing field. The Canadian thing is different. I think what's going on there is a renegotiation of NAFTA, if you want to call it that, because let's just take aluminum. The reason aluminum, 70% of the imports into the U.S. comes from Canada, is Canada has the cheapest power in North America. You need a lot of electricity to make aluminum. Most of us know that build data centers in the U.S. that there's no power left on the grid. Canadians have it in nat gas. They have it in hydro. So that's really a discussion about an integration of the economies that's beginning. Unfortunately for Canada, we're in a limbo zone there because the government has fallen. and there's no elections for another 6 weeks. So we don't have anybody to negotiate with right now. Trudeau, as you know, has fallen out of favor, doesn't have a mandate with the Canadian people. However, the premiers like Doug Ford in Ontario and Daniel Smith, they're talking with their counterparts like Doug Burgum and Howard Lutnick, and they're all talking every day. So the stuff going on here, but the economic union is the prize.
Well, meanwhile, President Trump is continuing to talk hardball, and he's talking about specifically whether or not Mexico and Canada have been doing what made him put a kind of pause on his tariffs for a month. He doesn't look too pleased. Let me just play that soundbite and get your reaction. Roll it.
You announced tariffs on Canada and Mexico. You immediately got action from both of them on border security and drug interdiction.
I did. A lot of action.
Is that good enough?
Expected.
Is that good enough?
No, it's not good enough.
It's not good enough. What do you think?
I've always said about Trump, you got to distinguish the noise from the signal. The signal for Canada, anyways, is, look, let's talk economic union and ultimately no tariffs in either east or west, north or south. That's a behemoth economy that he's spoken of multiple times. Now, when he says we got to buy the country, make it the 51st state, that gets the Canadians' ire up. They don't want to sell sovereignty, but they are interested in the union. Mexico's different. We've got that whole border situation with illegal immigrants. Fentanyl, both countries don't want anything to do with. So, you know, a $1.3 billion announcement out of Canada, then another $200 million out of Ontario, then another $39 million out of Alberta. So they're playing ball with Trump. But the big prize is the economic union. Keep your eye on that ball. And that's just Trump negotiating.
That's fascinating. So the next one is kind of penny ante, but we want to talk to you about it anyway. The penny, the United States penny. Donald Trump wants to eliminate it. Stop mining. He says it costs it does cost 2 cents for every penny that you make. So it doesn't seem to make any sense. What do you make of all this? Getting rid of the penny.
Well, he's right. It's stupid. Why would you pay 2 cents for a commodity that's worth 1? Who uses a penny anyways, unless you're putting them in your loafers? And nobody does that anymore. Get rid of it. It's useless.
Putting it in your loafers. That's an old reference that I do remember, Kevin. All right. Update on your bid for TikTok. Anything new happening there?
Yeah, there's been a big move. The mandate is shifted over to J.D. Vance. His staff is taking care of it. We know Walsh is involved now. They're filtering through the bids to try to figure out which ones are real. A lot of people announced interest in this deal that are posers, and they're going to figure out who's got the ability to close and who doesn't. Try to figure out Yi Ming, the largest shareholder in ByteDance, very important, the creator, the founder. It looks like the direction of this deal, it's going to be a Trump deal with Xi, but you need this Yi Ming guy to get on board, and then find a way to do a transition. You got to keep the algorithm working for a while, because that's what makes TikTok TikTok. But you know what I think is emerging that no one has talked about yet? This is really interesting. This is a chance for Trump and Xi to say, we're going to cooperate on a deal finally. We're not going to go to war on each other. Let's try for the first time to do a cooperation on tech. You got to abide by our laws in the United States, but let's make a deal. That would be really interesting for the world to see, because Xi wants to be part of the G7, the G8, if you want to call it that. And he's not going to get there until he starts abiding by the laws of the other G7. This is his chance. This could be the first deal. And look, if McCord O'Leary can be part of it, hey, we love economic unions with China. Absolutely.
I don't know if we trust them after all we've been through, though. Kevin, thank you so much for all that. Very interesting stuff. Appreciate it.
Welcome back. Well, Mark Fogel, an American teacher, finally home after more than 3 years in a Russian prison, thanks to President Trump. Fogel was wrongfully detained at a Russian airport in 2021 for carrying what he called medical marijuana. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison. He arrived at the White House last night wearing an American flag draped around him. He was welcomed home by President Trump. He called Trump a hero. President Trump said that he did a deal with Russia and it could help end the war in Ukraine. Here's what he had to say about this exchange. Watch.
What were the terms of this deal, Mr. President?
Very fair, very, very fair, very reasonable, not like deals you've seen over the years. They were very fair. And I think that's going to lead, and somebody else is being released tomorrow that you will know of. But we wanted to get this done, very important. And Steve wanted to actually fly over and get Mark and get him home properly, because it could be a pretty tough trip.
As as you heard, President Trump said we should expect another American hostage to be released today. Joining me now is Fox News contributor, former CIA station chief, who served in Moscow, Iraq, and Pakistan, Daniel Hoffman. Dan, thanks very much for being here. Give us your reaction and what you expect this to mean in terms of President Trump's efforts to end the war on Ukraine.
Well, it's an extraordinary diplomatic success to secure the freedom for Mark Fogel. I think many of us watched on television last night, and it's just, I think, hard to imagine for American citizens. Here was a guy behind enemy lines for 3 years in prison, bypassed twice by the Biden administration with exchanges that took place in 2022 and 2024. The Biden administration never designated him as wrongfully detained, at least not until late in the administration in August of 2024. That was the first time that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan even mentioned that Fogel was wrongfully detained. So this is a great success. What it portends for the U.S.-Russia relationship in the near term, Russian press spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has said that Russia expects the United States to release a Russian citizen. No further details on that. But there is possibility now. The communication channels are open. And we've got the war in Ukraine to negotiate. We've got arms control treaties, perhaps, to renegotiate. And a grand bargain, perhaps, in the offing, where the United States reduces or eliminates altogether some of those sanctions that have helped to cripple the Russian economy.
I mean, it's just extraordinary how many things President Trump is working on. And to look at these last 3 weeks, the first 3 weeks in office for President Trump for the second term, and all that he's been able to accomplish, what was the Biden administration doing?
I might be the wrong one to ask about that, Maria. I'm not sure I can give you a good answer there, except to say that we've seen
we don't understand what they were doing with Trump in office for 3 weeks, and he's working on getting hostages home, and he's working on Israel, and he's working on cutting out waste. Look, the president said he's focused on ending the war in Ukraine. He posted this on Truth Social, Dan. I'm sending Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent to Ukraine to meet President Zelensky. This war must and will end soon. Too much death and destruction. The U.S. has spent billions of dollars globally with little to show. When America is strong, the world is at peace. Zelensky is going to be meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Conference on Friday, Dan. He's already stated that he's open to making a deal with the U.S. What do you believe a deal to end the war in Ukraine could look like, Dan? Do you think that it has to be that Ukraine gives up territory or not?
Well, I think those are the details that we're going to have to work out. President Trump has floated the idea of Ukraine financing some of the post-war reconstruction and U.S. involvement in Ukraine with those rare earth metals that Ukraine has, which could be of great value to our economy. There's discussion potentially of European boots on the ground in Ukraine. Look, we've got to do all that we can to deter Russia from launching any further attack that threatens Ukraine's sovereignty and casts a shadow over Europe, with which we enjoy $1 trillion in bilateral trade. And that's what is important about this upcoming Munich Security Conference, where retired General Kellogg will be engaging with our allies. And then I think down the road, we'll definitely see some discussion with the Russians as well.
And then there's Gaza, the president remaining firm on his plans to rebuild the region. He was with the King of Jordan yesterday, King Jordan Abdullah II, visiting the White House. Here's what he said. Watch this.
One of the things that we can do right away is take 2,000 children that are either cancer children or in very ill state to Jordan as quickly as possible.
What you just said about the 2,000 is fantastic. It's so beautiful. It's music to my ears.
Dan, what about that? Initially, President Trump had the idea to have lots of regional players, Jordan, Egypt, take in Palestinians, and they said no. We're not going to do that. But now you heard the King of Jordan, Abdullah, say, yeah, I'll take in sick kids. Your reaction?
Yeah, 2,000 children is a far cry from the million or so Palestinians that the president was discussing with Egypt and with Jordan. Look, this is a very challenging national security threat for us. We can't allow Hamas to continue to rule over Gaza and present a threat to Israel and the region writ large. And the idea of sending Palestinians to Egypt and to Jordan risks destabilizing those countries further. I think there's going to be follow-on discussion here, and there may be more kinetic strikes now on Saturday if Hamas does not release the remaining hostages as the president demanded. Credibility is necessary for deterrence. The president has made a very clear statement that all hell would pay, that Hamas would pay a dear price in the event that they don't release those hostages. And so expect some developments this weekend if, as expected, Hamas does not do so.
Yeah, that's a great point. The president said if the hostages, all the hostages, not 2 or 4 or 3, and like drip, 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 all the hostages are released. If they're not released by Saturday at noon, all hell will break out. Do you think he's saying the U.S. will get involved militarily, or is he saying that he's basically going to say to Benjamin Netanyahu, do what you need to do?
Yeah, I don't think the president has any intention of the United States becoming directly involved, certainly not kinetically, in Gaza. But I do believe that the United States would give Israel all of the diplomatic top cover they need to conduct follow-on kinetic operations. I think the president was really struck by the appearance of these hostages when they were released, gaunt and malnourished, and reporting the torture to which they were subjected. I think the president has had enough of that, and rightly so.
Yeah. Dan, it seems like we are close to actually seeing resolutions in both of these situations. Is that a fair statement, or is that too optimistic?
Well, I don't get too optimistic about these things. When I served in the Middle East, there was some of the Middle East officials with whom I used to meet used to tell me that, today was a pretty rough day for us, but tomorrow will be a lot worse. It's hard to be optimistic there. There's just a lot of work to get done, but you're right about the dizzying pace from the Trump administration. If there's one thing that gosh, on a personal note, my late wife and I learned from her 4-year battle with cancer, there's nothing more precious than we have than time. And the president is putting his to good use.
Well, it seems like the talks have stalled between Israel and Hamas. I mean, obviously, when we saw those 3 hostages released over the weekend and how emaciated they look, and President Trump is saying a lot of them are probably dead anyway. You don't know where Hamas is going to go here, but certainly all hell to pay is quite aggressive from President Trump. So they hopefully are getting a message.
It is. No, absolutely. But this is the challenge. We're negotiating with a terrorist group. It's hard enough to negotiate with a state actor like Russia or China or, my goodness, North Korea. But Hamas, they're terrorists, and they want to annihilate the state of Israel, and they have us in their crosshairs as well. So if you think we're going to be able to strike a good deal with them, I'm not so sure that that's possible, and that's what some of these negotiations may be demonstrating, which means that we will be left with no choice but to finish the job there, and that's over to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his military.
Daniel, great conversation, and thanks so much for your service to our great nation, sir. Thank you.
Inflation putting a damper on Disney's magic. Take a look at this. For a 2-parent home with 2 young kids, it cost $4,200 for a 4-day visit at Disney World. Just 5 years earlier, it was over $1,000 less. And Disney knows this is a problem. Attendance at U.S. parks increased just 1% this past year compared to 6% the year before. How long until families start looking elsewhere? Some inside the company, according to a report in the Wall Street Journal, Taylor, say that the company has become addicted to price hikes and has reached the limits of what middle-class Americans can afford.
So, gosh, going to Disney is a privilege, not a right. So if this is a company that wants to raise prices, Americans have the choice to go or to not go. I think there's a few of us on this table who feel priced out of the market. I am one of the family of 3 that says, I don't know if I can cut it again. They said the average ticket on a most expensive day has now topped $200 a person, not including the fast track. Disney says, well, you don't need the fast track. You can still go and have fun. I went 3 years ago. I don't know if this was legal. I had a backpack and I had to pack my own peanut butter sandwiches because I can't afford an $18 pretzel if I'm going to Disneyland.
I can't believe you revealed that on television.
I know. The only other quick point I'll make is when I think Disney, I think a CEO who's about to retire, Bob Iger, who they already brought out of retirement, and a company without a succession plan that I'm waiting to hear about, and a company that's lost streaming subscriber customers. I need more.
Well, but Jackie, starting in late 2023, according to the Journal, they knew their own surveys showed that people were not planning to come back.
Yeah.
They knew this over a year ago.
And so I wonder if there's a correlation, and at some point we can do a deep dive on foot traffic versus price hikes, because I'm wondering if they're making up from reduced foot traffic as a result of people not really, biting on their DEI and wokeness, and parents saying, I don't want to take my kid to Disneyland and have to explain to them, weirdness about which bathroom to use, and characters that are dressed up as with no gender or not gender specific. And so I'm wondering if some of these price hikes are coming from that need as a business to turn a profit, and then
Lou, you're a parent.
I have 4 kids, and the happiest day of my life was not at Disney. It was when my 3-year-old at that time said she never wants to go back again. So my 2 oldest have been. My 2 youngest will never, ever go. It's just priced out of every American family. It's not for the average American anymore. Forget the politics of it and picking a fight with the governor of Florida. It's just not there. And to Taylor's point, they're just burning capital on the street.
And you've been too, right? You took your kids.
Yeah, I mean, I did not expect to do it on the cheap. I expected to spend a lot of money. Did you pack your PB&J? I did not pack the PB&J, but I thought it was going to be magical, like I was just going to get on these rides and the food was going to be great and the hotel was going to be big, and none of those things happened. It felt like a budget amusement park experience at a very high price.
Quickly, what they do have, though, is a cult following. People line up 3 years in advance for that Disney cruise.
People get married at Disney.
I know.
I mean, we have some of those people here.
There's a Disney marathon.
Go overboard.
If you can afford it, that's the problem.
Just real quick, I never went on the rides, but I love those character breakfasts when the characters were still wholesome and, and we still could be in awe of Cinderella and Snow White and didn't have to feel bad as women that we loved fairy tales.
And the Bippity Boppity Boutique is hard to beat.
I'm lost.
One of Lou's favorites. By the way, he loves that one.
It's your new vinyl.
House Speaker Mike Johnson admitting there could be another delay for the House reconciliation bill in an effort to firm up all of the details that are going to go into it. Johnson wants to combine all of the president's top wishes into one massive bill, while also finding cuts to offset things like the Trump tax cuts, border security. A group of more than 10 New York Democrats, led by Jerry Nadler, have sent a letter urging Speaker Johnson to include a repeal of the state and local tax deduction in any bill. They say that the SALT Deductibility Act has strong bipartisan support, and they're offering to work with Republicans to pass it. Joining me now is Maryland Congressman and Freedom Caucus Chairman Andy Harris. Mr. Chairman, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. So what do you make of this new push now to increase the SALT deduction?
Well, it's definitely going to be part of the negotiation on the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act extension, no question about it. But, Maria, the other thing that's in there is actually adjustment to the AMT. And obviously, one has to go in hand with the other. So, again, this is going to be subject to a negotiation because if we remove the SALT tax, a lot of those people are going to be subject to AMT. So, again, this is a balancing act. The members of the Freedom Caucus agree that we need to do something to reform SALT, but it's unclear that just removing the caps entirely is either fiscally responsible or possible.
Yeah, it's a great point, especially since you have so many others who are also having a voice in this discussion who want to cut spending. I mean, let's face it. You got net interest cost of $881 billion in fiscal year 24. Interest on the debt is the single largest item in the budget behind Social Security, more than spending on defense, Medicare, and children. So how are you going to work on all of this together when you've got serious costs in terms of defense, $125 billion there, in terms of the border, $150 billion at a minimum there, and then you've got all these new tax cuts that President Trump has introduced into the conversation, no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, and now you're talking about lifting the SALT deduction?
Well, you're right, Maria. The fact is that, we have to send a signal to the financial markets that we're serious on bending the deficit curve. I do believe that there is, as DOGE and Elon Musk are finding out, there are hundreds of billions of dollars of money improperly spent in the U.S. government. There are programs where people who are ineligible, like Medicaid, still collect or still are on those programs. We have to look at every program. The president said, look, Social Security and Medicare benefits off the table. We get it. But we have to look at really every other program to see to it that we can deliver the tax cuts and that we can deliver on deficit reduction.
Yeah, it's a great point that you make, because obviously the majority of our spending is mandatory spending. But recently, as I've asked this question of how are you going to come up with offsets, what I keep hearing from your colleagues is that, well, all mandatory spending is not mandatory. It's yes, okay, so 76% of the spending is considered mandatory on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, but are there other programs in that 76% that don't touch those programs?
Well, there are. Look, we think that there should be work requirements for able-bodied people who choose not to work. We don't think they should be on Medicaid. We don't think they should be receiving food stamps. There are ways that, again, we can cut the tremendous increase in what we call the non-Social Security, non-Medicare, non-interest payment part of mandatory spending. There are tremendous opportunities. We've uncovered them. We're going to be talking about them over the next few weeks because we think that's the gold mine that needs to be hit.
So Senate Republicans are going against the House Speaker in terms of his ideas on this one bill. They released their $430 billion plan to fund the president's agenda, and Senate Budget Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham wants two bills. He said that the resolution will increase annual spending by nearly $86 billion, fully offset with the spending cuts. The bill provides money for border security, deportation, but it does not extend Trump's tax cuts. The Senate expected to come out with the tax bill later this year, Congressman. So what about that? Newt Gingrich says if you're going to separate tax cuts out of the other stuff, you better have that done by July 4th. I mean, this is a really, fast calendar. Number one, are you expecting the large reconciliation bill on the president's desk by Memorial Day? And number two, will you be able to follow that up with tax cuts if you do this in two different bills?
Well, Maria, the most important thing is to get the president the monies he needs to control the border and to begin on his defense enhancement, Iron Dome, things like that.
Yeah.
So that's what the Senate does. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. The Freedom Caucus has said, look, we don't care whether it's one or two bills, but it needs to be started now because we need to get the president needs. So again, whether it's one or two bills, we don't care. I do agree with the speaker. We need to have this done by summer. I think we can do it. But if we go with one big bill, what we're doing is we're seeing the roadblocks in the House. That's the problem.
So in other words, if you go with one big bill, you've got people in the House who are saying, no, I'm not going to sign that. I'm not going to support that because the SALT increase is not in there, for example. Or no, I'm not going to support that because you're not cutting enough spending and the offsets are not there.
That's right. Well, those are complicated issues. We will resolve them by summer. The question is, will we resolve them by 2 or 3 weeks from now? And I think we're not going to. So, again, the House needs to decide. Are we going to do something quickly? If not, perhaps the Senate approach is the way to go. So it sounds to me like you've resigned to the fact that the reality is it's got to be two bills. Well, again, I was a little disappointed with the House Budget Committee. If we don't move on a bill this week, we are weeks behind schedule, and the president needs money for that border security.
Great point. You're absolutely right. Now you're talking about this week. It better be done this week. Meanwhile, while the president has had an incredible number of wins in the first 3 weeks, he's digging into these tariffs. I want to get your take on this. It's going to impose a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports today. And my sources tell me that tariffs on Europe are very close behind, that he's going to do a reciprocal tariff on Europe, and that will include a VAT tax applied to the tariff because Europe charges us a VAT tax. That's going to be announced later on this week. Here's White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, with me yesterday on Sunday Morning Futures. Watch.
The President has had an incredible number of wins in the first 3 weeks in the House Budget Committee. For example, the House Budget Committee has had an incredible number of wins in the first 3 weeks in the House Budget Committee. For example, the House Budget Committee has had an incredible number of wins in the first 3 weeks in the House Budget Committee. For example, the House Budget Committee has had an incredible number of wins in the first 3 weeks in the House Budget Committee. For example, the House Budget Committee has had an incredible number of wins in the first 3 weeks in the House Budget Committee. For example, the House Budget Committee has had an incredible number of wins in the first 3 weeks in the House Budget Committee. For example, the House Budget Committee has had an incredible number of wins in the first 3 weeks in the House Budget The president's making clear that we are going to pursue a policy of reciprocity. In other words, if we're getting charged 30% by Europe, then we need to charge them 30% in return. If they want to be charged less than 30%, they're going to have to lower their barriers so that it's fair and equal and, yes, reciprocal treatment. Here's another area where Europe is engaging in predatory practices. Tech companies are subject to digital taxes, censorship, and onerous financial penalties that are tens of billions of dollars every single year. Obviously, that has to go into the reciprocal treatment as well. You cannot have a situation where our country, our auto companies, our tech companies are just a piggy bank for Europe.
Yep, and now China is already retaliating, sir. Chinese tariffs on about $14 billion worth of U.S. goods take effect today. That range is from 10 to 15%, impacting crude oil, liquefied natural gas, farm machinery, and other products, Congressman. And by the way, you just heard Stephen Miller talk about what Europe does in terms of digital taxes and all this other stuff on our tech companies. China's not far behind because there's a good story in the Journal this morning. Here it is. China's strategy in trade war threaten U.S. tech companies. First line, officials in Beijing building a list of potential targets of antitrust probes, hoping to influence tech executives close to President Trump so he backs off on the tariffs. So we got it coming from all sides, Congressman.
That's absolutely right. And the president has made it clear that, again, there will be reciprocity, just like Miller said. I mean, look, if Europe wants to hide its tariffs under the guise of VAT taxes or, again, going after tech and digital, we have to uncover that. And we have to, again, begin a discussion with Europe about rolling those back.
Yeah. And by the way, we haven't even talked about this USAID, whatever you want to call it. I mean, all this money, $2 million for sex changes, LGBTQ activism in Guatemala, $6 million to fund tourism in Europe, $4.5 million to combat disinformation in Kazakhstan. Wow. Congressman, were you aware of this money that is being paid out from USAID?
We suspected for years that there was basically a RICO deal going on in USAID, that there was gross corruption, there was conspiracy to hide where this money was going. And thank goodness that Elon Musk has found the paper trail for where that money was going. It infuriates many Americans, and they deserve to be infuriated over this.
Yeah, we all are. Congressman, good to see you. We'll be following your work, sir. Thank you. Welcome back. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth sending a clear message to Europe at the NATO conference in Belgium, saying that the China threat is keeping the U.S. from guaranteeing the continent's security. Watch.
We must and we are focusing on security of our own borders. We also face a peer competitor in the communist Chinese with the capability and intent to threaten our homeland and core national interests in the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. is prioritizing deterring war with China in the Pacific, recognizing the reality of scarcity and making the resourcing trade-offs to ensure deterrence does not fail.
Joining me now is Gatestone Institute Senior Fellow and the author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, Gordon Chang, back with me. Gordon, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. Well, look, Pete Hegseth really laid it out in terms of the threat that is the Communist Party of China on America, and that has to dictate our positioning everywhere else. Your reaction?
Well, the important thing is not what we think we're doing, it's what China thinks we are doing. And I'm concerned that what Xi Jinping heard was a failure of American will to counter a clear case of aggression in Europe. And probably Xi Jinping is thinking, well, if the Americans won't stand up to Putin, they're certainly not going to stand up to me. We know this because of Chinese propaganda after the failure of Afghanistan, where they clearly linked it to an American failure to defend Taiwan. So we have to, I'm not saying what the Chinese are right. I'm saying that's what they're thinking, which means that Xi Jinping probably will be emboldened to be even more aggressive in East Asia.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me that the Congress overall is not on the same page on this. I mean, for so many years, the Democrats were screaming Russia, 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 trying to implicate President Trump in that ridiculous Russia collusion story. All of those years, they missed the aggression of Communist China. All of those years allowing Communist China to roll over the United States. We are now more than 2 years after the Chinese spy balloon surveilled the United States. And now we've got even a better idea of what that spy balloon was carrying inside and sending it back to communist China in real time. A new report finds that it was loaded with U.S.-made technology from at least 5 different American companies, including communication modules, other sophisticated surveillance equipment. The balloon, of course, was shot down over the North Carolina coast after traversing the country for a week. Joe Biden finally decides to shoot it down when it gets to the Carolinas. As the House Foreign Affairs Committee finds, Beijing invested more than $10 billion into the Caribbean since 2005, including a massive port just 87 miles away from Florida. Gordon, we've talked about this is the Chinese's MO. You know, acquire land near military bases, lend these countries money that they can't pay back, like in the Caribbean. And then once they can't pay it back, China takes over the area, including ports, which are incredibly important. My question is, you say that this has given China undue influence in the United States. We're seeing a rise at Chinese nationals at the border as well. So the threat is real, and we understand it. But for years, the Biden administration played it down. The Democrats have been playing it down. Remember when that spy balloon was traversing across the country, and they said, oh, no, it didn't send anything back. That was a lie. We know that it did send it back. But they misled the American people, again, even about that. Why?
You know, that is a great question, and I don't know the mentality of the Biden administration. But certainly General Mark Milley, just before he left his post as chairman of the Joint Chiefs, actually gave a public interview and said that he did not think that China sent anything back from that spy balloon, where we know that it in fact did, because subsequent reporting said that was clearly the case. And of course, this balloon had communication modules. This was, I think, a failure of the Biden administration to understand the threat posed by China, because I think Biden felt that he could accommodate the Chinese ultimately. And I think that was wrong, because the Communist Party has made it very clear. It has declared a people's war on us. They define that as total war. We have Chinese migrants in our country who are surveilling our military bases. It runs through the list. The signs of attack are obvious, and the Biden administration clearly failed to understand what was going on. Trump's taking a different view, and that's very good.
Yeah, I mean, even as President Trump is securing the border and deporting criminals, you still have a flow of Chinese nationals coming into this country, don't you? Why? Well, I mean, you can't just leave China. You need approval for that.
Yeah, if we go back 2 years, the Chinese migrants coming across our border, southern border, were family groups. In other words, people who were desperate to live in a free society. Now, U.S. Border Patrol reports that at least 2/3 of the Chinese migrants across the southern border are single males, military age, traveling without family members. They're coming in packs of 4 to 15. And in those packs, some of them just have all identical kit, which indicates planning for an attack. And this coincides with this uptick in tempo of Chinese incursions into our military facilities, both on the ground and in the air. This is looking at our vulnerabilities, seeing our patterns, planning for an assault on our bases.
That's unbelievable. And to see that they all have the same kits, that's also incredible. I didn't know that. Look, Gordon, you have a new op-ed for The Hill. It's about China's 15% tariff on American natural gas. You say it could undermine the U.S.'s ability to sell the much-needed energy exports to the rest of the world.
Yes. I mean, that's what people are saying, that the United States won't make long-term commitments to build LNG export facilities because they don't have Chinese contracts. I don't think that is right. And the reason is China took only 6% of our exports of LNG last year. Really, the world needs American LNG because it's the cleanest molecules in the world. And we're going into a world which is going to be energy starved. You know, President Reagan lowered the price of commodities to starve the Soviet Union. I think Trump is trying to do the same thing with his plans for drilling. And that means when Americans drill for profit, they're also drilling for peace, stability, and freedom around the world.
Right.
So, yes, we should be exporting as much LNG as possible because that gives the U.S. leverage to maintain stability.
Sure. Well, we've been covering the CCP's influence campaign on this program certainly for years. Season 2 of my Fox Nation special, Underwriting the Enemy, is now live. It is streaming on Fox Nation. We dive into Beijing's actions in the United States. Watch this.
This is not just an ordinary issue in U.S.-China relations.
This season on Underwriting the Enemy.
The red lights are blinking.
The Chinese Communist Party is essentially the mafia.
A real-time merger of the biggest U.S. banks and the Chinese government.
This has to be illegal. We're talking about a world war.
Lie after lie after lie.
It's happening in cornfields in Iowa.
We've got to stop funding our own demise.
Gordon, you were featured in season 1. What's your reaction as we continue looking at how America is underwriting the enemy, our number one adversary, China?
Yeah, the comments from Roger Robinson are absolutely critical. The United States should not be funding China's war machine and China's assault on us. And we're doing that because we're allowing Americans to invest in China. And also, of course, the trade and the technical cooperation. History is going to look back at us and say, why did we do this even after the dangers became evident? And so your documentary really is critical to helping Americans understand what they now must do. They may not want to do it, but if we're going to maintain our society and our peace and stability, we absolutely have to.
All right. Gordon, great to have you this morning. Thanks so much. Underwriting the Enemy is streaming right now on Fox Nation. Good to see you, sir. We'll be right back.